everybody, and thanks for joining today's webinar on the topic of art and partnerships. I'm Lauren Resnick, founder and CEO of PoE Arts and Culture, and today we're going to dive into the fascinating world of art and partnerships with my co-host, Megan Mayer, PoE's Global Head of Art Partnerships, and guest speakers from MTArt agency, Blue Gaydon, Director of Brand Partnerships, and Sarah Adaman, Director of Public Art. Before we dive into today's topic, I'm just going to share a little bit about our guest speakers, MTArt agency. They are a full-service artist representation firm led by founder Maureen Tanguay, who started the company 7 years ago with the goal of disrupting the traditional model of artist management. The company boutique firm provides services in retail activations, curation, and PR. With offices already in Paris, London, and Monaco, and LA next year, MTArt are expanding and truly disrupting the art world on an international scale. Next, I'm going to share some background on my own company, PoE Arts and Culture. We are an international creative strategic advisory company with a focus on arts and culture, hospitality, and lifestyle brands. Our team have been blessed to work with some of the world's top brands, including Whitney Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Six Senses Resorts, Soho House, and that's just to name a few. So with all that being said, let's dive into today's topics. Just to highlight what we're going to be covering, the history of art and partnerships, where this all started from, the business model of art and partnerships, life after the pandemic, public messaging, ROI for investors and clients, and the future, where we really see this space headed. So for everyone that's joined us today, thank you again so much. If you have questions for our panelists, please just pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll make sure to save some time at the end to answer those questions. So with that being said, let's jump straight in. I'm going to introduce everyone to Megan Mayer, PoE Arts and Culture's leading expert in art partnerships. Megan's based in New York and works with clients around the globe, partnering artists with luxury brands such as Mercedes-Benz, Givenchy, Hugo Boss, and cultural institutions such as the Brooklyn Museum and Cooper Hewitt. And with that being said, over to you, Megan, to start us on this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today and sharing our conversation. I mean, I've had immense pleasure in working in this space for the past decade and very excited to discuss this with subject with MTArt. You know, what we have here is a really rich and fascinating history of partnerships with artists dating back to the 13th century, the Medicis in Italy, you know, the banking family, patron of the arts. Fast forward to where we are today with the likes of UBS and their art partnerships as a cornerstone of their business, as shown with their ongoing support of Art Basel. I mean, really, by investing in visual arts, organisations like MTArt really help build currency and community through successful partnerships. You know, working with towns and cities around the world can help foster relationship with artists and helps them, as a town and a city, become real cultural barometers. And this in turn actually has a positive impact on, you know, the local community. It also helps with business and tourism. And then on the other side of the aisle, you know, we have corporations and luxury brands that I've experienced that are really increasingly investing in art partnership to access untapped audiences or differentiate themselves culturally and gain new meaning by association with the artists. I mean, just this week, Louis Vuitton announced its second partnership with preeminent Japanese artist Yaya Kusama. And this is 10 years after their first creative endeavor in 2012. The artist's beautiful dot artwork has been featured over and across the products. It's also been installed in their windows and installations and public art sculptures. And, you know, it's these particular items, especially the Louis Vuitton products themselves, have become highly collectible pieces on the secondary market. They may as well be artworks themselves. I mean, the brand has a really rich history in art partnerships with the likes of Stephen Sprouse and Takashi Murakami. We all remember that one. It's highly visual. And Richard Prince. You know, and all of these partnerships help exemplify Louis Vuitton's desire to remain a cultural powerhouse. So this brings me to MTArt. One of your most recent projects involves bringing a sculpture by artist Lorenzo Quinn, his work is just magnificent, started at the Venice Biennale, to the public art component at this year's Qatar World Cup. So Blue, can you take us back to how it all began at MTArt? And what is the driving force behind your art partnerships that make a successful project between the client and the artist?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really helpful if we start a bit, back at the beginning. So as Lauren touched on, Marine Tanguy, our CEO and founder, began the company 17 years here in London, having grown up in France and worked in the art world all her career. She essentially saw what we refer to as a bit of a gap in the market within the sector itself, and really felt that while the gallery model is absolutely integral to the art world's success and to the representation of artists, it was quite one-dimensional in terms of what it could offer in the modern day world. By that, I mean, it was primarily concentrating on the sale of artworks, adding those artworks to private collections, to institutions, and by doing that, obviously solidifying and incrementing the reputation of the artists they represented. However, when Marine was running a gallery in LA, she was very, very influenced by the talent agency model within Hollywood and was being mentored by Michael Ovitz, who some of you may know founded CAA and totally transformed that talent agency model. And she felt that while she had some amazing artists and was representing some of the most exciting names within the visual sector, she really wanted to be able to do more on their behalf. She was getting a lot of inbound requests from brands, from land developers wanting to, partner with these artists in different ways. And ultimately her role really didn't expand to that. She was really, ultimately, like most people working in the gallery sector, concerned with selling works of art. So that's really how MTArt came about, how it was born. So we are still the leading, but were the first talent agency to represent artists. We look after about 50 artists worldwide, all contemporary. And in putting it in very simple terms, what we've done is we've retained the art sales arm. So we can sell art, and we do sell art day to day to private collectors. But what we've done is essentially plugged a creative agency in the back of the talent agency, which allows us to advise brands and developers, landowners across the world on art strategy, on partnerships, on what kind of collaborations we feel will work best for their marketing strategies for the year to come, what will give them the best alignment with artists who are wanting to tell similar messages and tell similar stories, and ultimately get them the best ROI. And then on the sort of the third arm, but very much linked into that, is the brand public art pillar, which Sarah, my colleague, oversees.
Hi. I think Blue explained it really well, but public art is a really important one for us, just because it's a long-term and it's a strategic solution that has the potential to bring powerful messaging and cultural change for many spaces. So we work with a lot of property developers, we work with councils, we work with communities, and obviously in certain examples, we work with brands to execute their messaging and the brief. So on a very practical level, the reason that people do choose public art is more around to really increase the footfall in the area. I'll get more about it, but this is kind of in a nutshell explaining how we are approaching the public art with our artists.
And I think really on both on the kind of when it comes to public art collaborations, actual representation as a whole, where we see our point of difference is really our values and our vision. The fact that we are sort of, our ethos, if you like, is don't invest in art, invest in artists. We want to represent, and we're very proud to represent some of the most exciting talents within the visual sector. We're the first B Corp within the UK art world, which means that everything, impact and positive change is the sort of driving force. Coming back to your question, Megan, the driving force behind every partnership we do. It has to make sense. It has to have some form of positive impact where possible. And we are constantly, as a team, working behind the scenes, advising our artists on how to have a more sustainable, production line, how to work with innovative materials, how to swap out something that they're finding actually is just sitting really uncomfortably within their production or their practice. How can we do that in a better way? How can we help them have more progressive conversations, bring topics to the forefront that potentially have been taboo or need light shedding on them? So I think we're really proud of how we're very, very sort of value driven. And we really encourage our artists to keep a strong voice in all of their areas.
So much, Blue and Sarah, for that. I think perhaps for another day, but the discussion between art and sustainability is one that I think hasn't even gone where it needs to go. We need to go so much further with it, but yes, for another day we'll be
we will touch on it with examples.
So on to our next question. Obviously MTArt covers a rich ground servicing arts and culture from a diverse range of areas, including artist management, commissions for public art installations, brand collaborations, right through to bespoke art experiences and private art collections. So what I'm interested in is, how do you believe, or what is it that is the golden thread that ties all of these services together as a business model to benefit both artist and client? And I think, we can see definitely, as you've just explained before, there's that real support for the artist keeping their voice. Could you explain it, I guess, from both sides and the thread that ties it together as a business?
Shall I jump in? So I think...
Yeah, of course, I will just fill in where you were.
The golden thread, the sweet spot, if you like, really is about the perfect matchmake between an artist and a brand. And if that matchmake doesn't make sense, then I firmly believe that it'll fall apart and ultimately lacks integrity. So I think that's where we try and work really, really hard, both on our artists and our clients' behalf, to make sure that marriage has real synergy. And what does that synergy look like? For me, and for everyone here within the agency, we talk a lot about shared values. We talk a lot about audience exchange. We talk a lot about themes, messaging, and storytelling. So whilst there's sort of a lot of those words do seem like kind of today's buzzwords, they are actually really integral to a collaboration making sense. ROI has to come into it. Yes, there are those wonderful projects that are very philanthropically driven and don't necessarily have a very commercial objective at the end of it. But more often than not, there is a certain level of measurability and therefore a desire to make sure that, the consumer, the B2C journey really makes sense once that initial moment of encountering a collaboration or a partnership that involves brand X and artist Y through to, how they ultimately will maybe end up at that purchase moment, or that, booking moment or that visiting moment. So yeah, I think it is for us, it's really value driven, has to come back to the story and it has to have that synergy. Otherwise you kind of need to start at the beginning and go over again.
One thing I want to add is I agree with everything you said. Also, we have a very interesting team that is recently grew in the last couple of months that has various different expertise that brings into the room when it comes to that. You mentioned that golden thread that ties all these together, it's really important to have a theme that has the relevant expertise in order to answer a certain type of brief. So, Blue has a very strong commercial background from British Vogue and Wallpaper, just really big brands. My background is architecture. I studied architecture. I work with architects. So my role starts, for example, when the brief comes, immediately to be able to ask very key questions in order to be able to deliver those answers. Our creative officer, the chief creative officer, Jan, has a massive advertising and creative agency background. So he does know how to communicate with the creative director who gives us the brief in order to execute it, because it is difficult. They're the brief writers, or they're actually the commissioners, and there's always an interesting sensitivity in between bringing an artist into the game in order to deliver it. So a team who really understand these dynamics and how people work all together is also a good balance of a business model of that, building that golden thread.
That's a great point.
Yeah, we would be nowhere without the people like our project managers.
Absolutely.
We have a designated person who researches for us, which is a huge luxury. She's phenomenal. So all of those elements, we can go into a room armed with the best, artist brand marriage, but we've got there through a very, very strong driving force and without wanting to blow our own trumpets, a really impressive selection of very, very creative brains. So for which we're very grateful day in, day out.
I mean, I completely understand, often, a client will deliver a brief and perhaps have an artist in mind. But it's about that connection and really making the narrative make sense around that partnership. So completely appreciate.
And I think it's that thing of really looking at it through a brand's lens, looking at an artist, let's say, through a brand's lens. But what we have the luxury of doing is actually, it's almost big. We represent, like I said, around 50 artists. It's like we can look through each project or partnership through the lens of about 50 different creative directors. And yes, not all will match each one, but I think that is also something that I'm hugely grateful for, and really is part of the magic of what we do, because we get to swap hats a million times a day, depending on which artists we're talking to, depending on which clients. And it's almost like a sort of funneling down exercise on some projects where there may be 10 artists put on the table, or 5. And it's just like what really, really helping a brand understand why we think this artist will work best for this activation in this space. And obviously budget plays a role.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I think that ties in nicely to my next point, which is really about art and culture as an international enterprise. And it really brings together clients and artists from around the world to create unique partnerships, and especially relevant through art and hospitality, which PoE is really passionate about. It's one of our cornerstones, is the mixture between art and hospitality and the partnership there. And just to give our audience some examples, the company Photographica, a vibrant place for photography with food experiences, a place for inspiration and events. It's really art and hospitality under one roof. Then there's someone like Damien Hirst, who's recently partnered with Claridge's Hotel in London, his signature butterfly stained glass installation that's just recently gone in. And then, of course, a classic example, the gorgeous La Colombe d'Or in the south of France. The hotel is covered in incredible art from Picasso to Sean Scully, and includes, of course, the Alexander Culver sitting by the pool. So really the success of a hospitality venture can really be achieved through the artist narrative, but working closely with a hospitality brand to really create the vision, the values, and what kind of statement the hospitality brand wants to make, and also, of course, leaving a lasting impression on their guests. So, Blue or Sarah, how can you explain in terms of what you're working on, this successful launch of hospitality projects, and what tools do you use to achieve lasting successful results, specifically in the hospitality sector?
I think what we we tend to look at these the hospitality partnerships, of which we do a fair amount of, kind of in two camps, if you like. So one is really helping brands at the beginning of that art journey, when they're opening a new hotel, when they're renovating, when the presidential suite is opening. What does that permanent art collection look like? And often that is a sort of a very early stage conversation, and very much goes hand in hand with the interior designer who has been, who's won their pitch to do that property. I would actually say the second type of brief, let's say, that we receive is more about temporary activations. And those for me are also hugely interesting. So on the one hand, you have this permanent, in most, let's be honest, most hotels and restaurants that we walk into, art plays a role. And a lot of it sits there on a permanent basis. So that is a kind of long-lasting impression, which as a restaurant or hotel opens is a huge talking point and part of the communication strategy. Once a hotel or restaurant has been open for a while, that permanent collection, unless it is, let's say, a Damien Hirst, which will always come up in any piece of press coverage probably that said restaurant will receive, that story becomes a little bit, it's less at the forefront, let's say. So I think what we really admire with our hospitality partners is how they retain that freshness and how they keep conversations going around art through each calendar year. So it could be a facade takeover. It could be an interior takeover of a restaurant. It could be hosting an event or an immersive art experience that between a brand and an artist within their space. It could be marking something in the art calendar for, to celebrate that moment. It could be something to do with Christmas. We've all seen 1,000,001 amazing artist interpretation of like the Christmas tree, old and new. So I think ultimately if we go back to what the driving force is behind it, it's brand building, of course. It's it's using culture to elevate the space that they're trying to welcome people into. But in terms of those temporary activations, it is also about driving footfall. There usually is a very, very important commercial role that each of those collaborations play. We've all, between us, shared notes on what restaurants or what hotels or what holiday destinations we want to go to between our friends. We've screenshotted things on Instagram. We've put them on our bucket list. How long does that actually take us to book that restaurant or have that immediacy and that desire to go now and try and get a table or a hotel room? And I think that is often the undercurrent and very, frankly, necessary driving force behind these partnerships. It can also just be about celebration. It could be marking an anniversary, but I think more often than not it's like, please shed light on what we are doing with this incredible artist at the moment. We are giving this artist a platform. We want to invite you in or encourage you in to come and experience what we've created for you at this moment in time. So that gives, and then there's obviously an amplification element. There's a shareability. You want all of our briefs, every single one, Sarah can back me up, have this, like, we want it to be very photographic. We want it to be very shareable, because ultimately then, again, it may sound cynical, but there is this desire to show your friends and your networks what you've visited. There is then a FOMO element that then trickles down into a nice positive domino effect of other people then wanting, we are all very influenced by the people who we follow and trust and whose opinions matter to us. So it goes without saying that that hospitality element really feeds into that. I think, Sarah, you probably can add quite a lot from your side on the larger scale partnerships. I mean, what I'll do is I'll just, as Sarah's trying to bring up my screen and show you a couple of things that we've done recently.
I also, while Blue's showing them, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge the fact that we live in a much more digital era. So the way we consume things is, yes, people, I think in the past, there were hundreds of people had a footfall of an hotel courtyard, but nowadays that impressions can lead to 100,000, 1 million, 2 million, 10 million. So the reach is much different. So the thing that any
brief we receive, especially in the hospitality sector with international brands, it needs to have that effect of talking to much wider audience, but also as well as pleasing their own travelers, residents, to kind of match what they would like to see on a day-to-day basis. So this was what we did for Freeze this year in October. It was with, again, Lorenzo Queen. The sculpture is called Give. It has a living olive tree inside, and the meaning of it is that we took so much away from the earth, and now it's our time to give it back. And this was relatively complex project because this piece came from Spain, just for Freeze, for a couple of months, and we presented it with Rosewood Hotel in London. Excuse me?
No, we were just getting a bit of feedback. There was an echo on your...
I think just because my voices can be heard in Blue's computer slightly.
I think it's better now.
Okay. And then actually, this is the one that I would like to also mention. This is a partnership with Claire Luxton and Intercontinental Hotels. And this started with London only, but then turned into much more international collaboration with the artists. And actually, what was really interesting is that a couple of weeks ago, Intercontinental launched their first NFT collection with Claire Luxton. And that's really interesting because the hotel kind of loyalty points, members points, they can bid on this artwork. So there's a really interesting tie-in with the NFT as well, that how the hospitality sector is communicating with their loyal customers. So you could see plenty of people are analyzing this on TikTok nowadays, but that was also a new kind of take on from the way how hospitality sector engages with an artist, and that what I ties back in that digital, the way we consume things digitally nowadays is carrying these partnerships to another level.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
This was a really full immersive kind of experience, both here in London, in New York, in Dubai, various properties within their portfolio. In London, Claire took over a suite. She curated a Spotify playlist. She did curated cocktails. Her artwork, permeated through into the interior design. We had projections on the larger side of the Park Lane, the north side of the hotel, and then you can see this large scale vinyl installation through the front of it. We did a swimming pool in New York. It was a really multifaceted but fully integrated partnership. They've actually asked Claire to come on board in a more kind of official sense within the group moving forward. So it was one of those wonderful partnerships that started small and kept on growing and growing. And with that, I guess, thinking behind the scenes, with that confidence and trust and the relationships built both between them and MTArt and them and Claire, it really was one of those really fruitful partnerships that felt very comfortable. Organic is quite an overused word, but I really think in this sense it was that. There was a very natural liking for each other. I could tell there was, we did a first event. There was just a very nice feeling between how them and Claire communicated, how they worked together, a huge amount of respect and creative freedom to Claire, even though we know that a hotel group as big as that has a huge number of boxes to check, and a lot of pressure riding on every penny spent. So yeah, it was a great project. This is something which is I guess for us a really interesting project which married sustainable land art with content, and really it was one of those projects which could have easily not happened. And I mean that in that Cantonet Brown, the client, didn't need to mark this moment in their journey, but they really wanted to. The journey was such that they were sort of giving their chateau, if you like, a bit of a rebirth and a renaissance, and doing a huge shift in how the product, looking at every element of the production line and how they could make that more sustainable and ultimately make them a sort of more eco vineyard. And to mark this huge effort and financial commitment to that, they commissioned one of our artists, David Popper, who's a sustainable fresco artist, to create this beautiful piece of land art right through the center of their vineyard. And what he's famous for, not only the fact that he uses biodegradable pigments, so his frescoes always have this ephemeral nature to them, but also the fact that he creates the most beautiful videos and campaigns, if you like, to go alongside his artworks. The third strand is often an NFT, which again, for him, especially because his actual physical artwork's ephemeral, I love that by recreating it or giving it a life as an NFT, it sort of works as a sort of paradox between the temporary nature of the physical work. So this was a really interesting project, and one that, we were really, really proud of.
Thank you so much. I mean, those are beautiful works, and I think our attendees will be inspired by some of those and hopefully go on thinking of their next project with those ideas in mind. And, I think we'll come to the next question, which is really, anyone here who's been in the arts and cultural space or even the hospitality space in the last couple of years has obviously been through the trauma of the pandemic, where things slowed down, museums were closed, restaurants were closed. How did MTArt thrive, or at least survive during that time? Is there something that perhaps is a point of difference from your competitors in that space, and how did that?
This is definitely Sarah's answer, because it was all for us during the pandemic about public art. So I would happily hand over to Sarah to answer this one.
I think it's all about kind of nurturing the existing. First of all, I think with any business, nurturing the existing contacts and making sure that you're supportive of each other, supportive of your suppliers, supportive of your clients, artists, was the key to survive during the pandemic. And I think MTArt did that really well. We had a continuous relationship. We always have a continuous relationship with the Crown Estate. We're their official public art supplier. And that continued during the pandemic period, because people were, although not entering into buildings, not getting together, people were still going out to have a fresh breath of air. And we had that, I would like to say, perhaps the opportunity in that moment to kind of enhance their visits, add some public art elements to the city, especially the prime locations of the city. So that will be my immediate answer, I think. Other than that, I think public art also, pandemic brought so many different levels of new things into our lives, a lot of anxieties as well. So nurturing that mental health element was also really important. So we had that unique element of the providers of art in that respect in public. Obviously, naturally, public art creates footfall in the pandemic context as safe as possible, but also naturally it brings that sense of safety into spaces. So that was one of our advantages too. But as I said, as a business to survive, I think it's all about being resilient. Obviously, a lot of businesses went through really tough times, but the key was to kind of really being supportive of every single party to see how we can resolve certain moments, certain situations. A lot of sacrifices, of course, but they all turned out in a most positive way for all of us to move forward. So no one was left behind, let's say.
And I think as well, what the team did brilliantly is, like Sarah touched on, it was a time where anxiety levels had reached peak. And so it was also not just sort of making sure that we were bringing art to the masses to try and help in a very broad sense, but also looking at who are those artists who have joined us, who've trusted us? Are they okay? How's their creative output? How are they feeling about their practice? Are they inspired? Have they got a creative block? So I think Marine herself was, she's hugely close to each and every artist that she's onboarded, and so I think it was amazing how much time and effort was sort of put back in to just checking in with our artists on a very regular basis. And I definitely think, you know, I joined at the second lockdown in the UK, so nearly 2 years ago. It was incredible to see how that first lockdown had gone for a lot of artists, how in touch we had been with them, how much we had still worked 100% to try and make sure that for every public art brief, or, you know, less so the brand collaborations, let's be honest, during that time, that we were putting forward as many artists as we could and making sure that they still felt that there was purpose, and frankly that there was still in every possible way money coming in, because that, again, financial security during that time for anyone who was self-employed and most people in the creative sector was really, really tough. So there, I think that was really something that I was hugely impressed with, and still am today when I joined.
That's really interesting. I wanted to actually just jump in here and make a comment, Blue, to your point. Just to, you know, from our perspective, we found that there are a lot of corporate organizations and brands that couldn't actually spend their advertising dollars on products, because there was a moment in time that it was a little bit gouge to actually market a product, especially those that were not in need for consumers. And so those, interestingly, I found that corporate organizations were channeling their funds into public art to say something positive and connect with the consumer in a different way that they otherwise wouldn't have done with their, you know, product line or their normal advertising. Did you find that this economy channeled its way through to your doors?
I didn't quite catch that one, Sarah. I'll pass it on to you.
It's probably for Sarah. Did you find
Yeah.
that, I guess, the connection between public art and corporation?
No, of course. I think, especially after the pandemic, there was a very serious growth of much more kind of private companies, or let's say property developers or investors looking at public art commissions. Obviously, there are a few layers of that. We can have a whole webinar looking at this, but I'll try to explain as clear as possible. First of all, pre-pandemic levels, retail was already struggling, and during the pandemic, they had the biggest hit, which led into the big cities, obviously, big or small cities, but mainly big cities, the big empty retail units appearing. That's with all the, and these are the existing ones. I'm not talking about all the new developments that are being built with big retail units conquered inside. So obviously this came to a point of how that's during this recovery, how that meanwhile use is going to be resolved. And public art played a big part in that field. So a lot of developers start to look at what is our cultural strategy. So pandemic played one side of it, and in the last, again, starting with the pandemic, increasing discussions around diversity and representation, cities and how cities are designed for women's safety, underrepresented group safety, disabled people's safety, because we all know that our cities are not necessarily designed to reflect these people in mind. So the improvement in that increasingly occurred in all developers and councils and urban planners' mind. So public art started to play a big role in order to solve this. And it's not an easy answer. It is, in my opinion, there are some bodies that does it really, really well. For example, Future City in the UK and internationally, to look at that cultural strategy, and people like us to look at how we can, the best way to execute it. But what I wanted to say around is that it is a big journey, and it also needs to involve a lot of community consultation. So these things shouldn't be kind of like a sticker of, here's a piece of art, go ahead and enjoy moment. More like reflecting on who is passing by from that street, who is the audience, who's consuming this art, who is it beneficial to? So there is a big players and distinction in between those elements. There's a lot to be discussed in that. I mean, obviously the brand commissioner, if the commissioner is the brand, then there's a different element, because then it's much more consumer-led commission. But when the quotation marks, consumers are the public in the property real estate scene, that is a bit more complicated matter.
Thank you so much. I know we've still got so much to say, and we've got 15 minutes left, and we have some great questions from our attendees, so I want to make sure we get there. Megan, do you want to jump to the next question? And
Yeah.
then we can kind of make sure we get to our attendees' questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've just touched on this just now, and that the fact that there's been, a shift in the cultural landscape and the importance of art and the type of message that it delivers to the public. For one, to elevate the mood, which was most necessary during the pandemic and has still become a necessity, and also reflect the issues that people are facing. And I feel like more and more these days, clients are looking at artists to help them convey that message. You've shared examples of the work that David Popper did at the Chateau in France. Can you share any other recent partnerships that have resonated with the public and actually created a very important awareness that may have happened very recently?
I can give an example, because this happened very, very recently for the Black History Month in the UK. This was October, and we did.
Can I just jump in? Is it working okay, or is that a funny share?
It works okay, but the only thing I don't know, Blue, if we have this project in our deck. But it was a project commissioned by Crown Estates, and it was, again, the previous thing that I touched base on was for retail meanwhile use element, and this was a retail store that was in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. For those who live in London, they can still go and see it. Once you go to Piccadilly Circus, it's impossible to miss it. So Delphine Diallo, a French Senegalese artist, she had an idea that was pre-developed. It was to look at kind of the Black diaspora in the UK and the lost memories of that generation. And coincidentally, Getty Images opened their archives generously for artists to use to celebrating Black History Month. And she made an application. It was accepted by the Getty Images, and it was a not-for-profit commission. Crown Estates supported it, and we worked on this project together with Delphine on the best way to reflect the lost memories, lost images of the Black diaspora in the UK. And she prepared this beautiful collage, also touching her own family history and lines into that. And then we installed it at Piccadilly Circus. It's still there. It was very strong. The moment we installed it, like the moment it was on, people absolutely stopped, start taking pictures, start asking questions. So that was a really good one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the right partnership that you've just described really does provide artists and companies and organizations with the opportunity to, access untapped audiences and differentiate themselves and gain new meaning through this association. What's really interesting for a lot of our audiences from the client and the artist side is what you actually look for in an artist and their work, and how you can actually match up a successful client partnership to ensure that they have a suitable criteria, for the project. I mean, it's, especially when you're looking at an artist's body of work, when you're onboarding, is it, you've got a curatorial eye in your offices with your various backgrounds from your team, but what is the singular thing that you are really looking for? Or is it just you have a formula of 4 key things that will match up for that?
I would let Blue answer it, but
such a great question. I think individuality for us, uniqueness in offering, is so important for us. Drive, I think that's something that we place huge importance on, and ambition within artists, young or established. For that, if we feel we meet an artist whose work we've all been admiring for years, and we feel that we just don't see that drive and that ambition and that we're not expecting every young artist to know where they want to go and where they want to be in 5 years' time. But if there's an impressive energy and dedication towards that ambition, that for us is a huge tick. Yeah. And I think it's values. We really look for artists, again, young and old, to be storytellers. So a practice that creates beautiful work, but for us doesn't necessarily have the depth that we think that the clients that we look after will ultimately be looking for. It's a tricky one for us. And I think as well is there needs to be a certain, as we onboard artists, like obviously I touched on at the beginning, uniqueness, but we are obviously very careful within the MTArt network not to onboard or to sign an artist who we feel work or practice or themes are too identical to another artist that we already represent, because ultimately we'll therefore always be pitching those two artists against each other. And for us, it doesn't feel comfortable from an emotional perspective, but it also doesn't make sense from a kind of time and efficiency perspective. I'm sure there obviously are loads more things that we look at, but for me, those are the priorities. For example, I think, we purposely sign emerging, mid-level and established names, but what I really see is that it's actually the individual behind the creative output, behind that artwork, that we're really looking at. And that's, I think, where we feel our proudest of them, when they get given a moment to share something that's very important to them on behalf of a brand. Let's say Robert Montgomery project that he was commissioned to do by Oliver Eliasson's nonprofit Little Sun up at COP26 in Glasgow last year. It was a great example of that. Robert has long been a quiet but very dedicated climate change campaigner. So it made sense that Oliver and his team came to Robert, and I'll see if I can just reshare that screen. My screen sharing has gone a little off, but let me see if that comes through okay. Oh yeah, now it's working. So as you can see in the top right-hand picture, Little Suns, which is something that Oliver and his team at Little Sun have developed, are handheld solar devices, which are ultimately distributed to sub-Saharan Africa, to communities that live off-grid, to promote extended learning hours, make domestic chores easier, and are very much the driving force, and I guess the product behind this desire to make people more educated about solar energy and its benefits. So Robert composed and constructed his largest ever light poem, which is obviously what he is famous for as an artist, famed for. We built it in Glasgow. It's 12 meters by 6 meters from memory. And we replenished, with the help of the communities in Glasgow, replenished the solar lights on every single letter twice a day, because obviously they had to be laid flat, so the photovoltaic panel on the back could be charged by the sun. So actually it was the practicalities of this artwork being sort of made and not dismantled, but replenished, if you like, every day, together with the very, very powerful messaging that was in the 4 lines of the poem, really sort of shone a spotlight and gave Robert a voice to call for this mass switch to renewables at one of the most key moments in the calendar, at the biggest climate change conference in the world at the time. So, that for me is just, it was a great example of what we look for, and how an artist's voice is used through their art to help convey important and topical messages.
I think that's a perfect example, because at the end of the day, it's all about, artists need to share that vision with you, have innovation and have an incredible work ethic, but they also need to be, inventors and creators, and push the clients and also MTArt forwards into what is next, to anticipate how we can take public art to another level. So, we don't have much time left, so just...
So I think actually what I'd like to do is just touch on the couple of 3 questions we have from our audience, and then we can kind of wrap up with our plan for the future in this space. So I'll touch on this question, which is in regards to when do you find it most productive for artists and architect to be working together? And I know Sarah's going to have her opinion. In my opinion, you know, I work on these projects all the time when, and we'll probably all cringe to this, when the artist comes in at the end and there's a budget set, and then you know, there's some kind of art just delivered and kind of squeezed into the design. So in answer to the question, from my perspective, it's absolutely imperative that the artist is involved in the design phase of the project. I think, number one, it's most exciting to have, and obviously depends on the artist, but you know, really exciting to have an artist's opinion on the design of what is the narrative of the design itself, what is the narrative of the architecture, and how can art help shape that rather than squeeze into it. And so a really beautiful dialogue can actually happen that, you know, if both parties, architect and artist, are open-minded and a really open discussion, open dialogue, then, you know, there's a beautiful outcome to that design and the implementation of that. So from my perspective, it would be in the design phase. And Sarah,
I completely agree. I would even go one step further and said it should be, if we're talking about outdoor public art, it should be at the master planning stage, really, to look at kind of, because the master planning stage really looks at the background of the community, the area, the history, and that's where the art meets itself. And you're so right, Lauren, you hit the nail in the head. Mostly it's all about the development is finished and done and it's all glossy, and somebody says, oh, we need an art piece, let's look at it. And that's where it doesn't work. And that's definitely the design stage. Also, I find it really important, that chemistry, because what we forget is that in the past, and when I mean really, really past, when the ornament wasn't a crime and everything was much more crafty, actually the cities that we love walking around is the result of architecture and artists' heavy partnership. So the facades we love and adore and we take the pictures of are featuring a really interesting crafts and arts in them. So obviously, I'm not saying this doesn't happen anymore, but it's with the modernism, it happens less and less. However, there's still few architects who are really valuing that artist partnership in the design phase, bringing them on board really on. Most importantly, convincing their client that they should allocate a separate budget and separate vision and look at it from the added value point of view when commissioning an artist. So I find that in that moment, the architect's role really important, because the architect is the one who needs to convince the client, who needs to convince the council, who needs to kind of look at that collective memory wherever they're building, and also work with artists, because let's accept the fact that these are two big egos, yes. And they need to work harmoniously together. There are beautiful examples still from today. In my previous role, I worked with Eric Perry a lot, and anyone who's an architecture enthusiast and who may not know Eric Perry, I strongly suggest one visits his buildings, because he looks at this interesting materials and also the artist collaboration in his facades and his buildings and so on. So that would be my addition to answer Sarah Moylan's question.
Perfect, thank you. I'll go for this next question, which is about how, and we all know this, artists don't want to be linked necessarily to corporates because they feel like they're selling out. So how do you guys manage or guide them through that connection?
I was hoping you were going to ask that question. Phenomenal question from an anonymous person asker. Thank you so much. This is something that we talk about day in, day out, that I talk a lot about in other talks that I've given, and it is always a question that comes up, so I'm really glad it has here. I think the answer in short is very much linked back to what I said at the beginning. It's about, does this make sense? Is this marriage, is this union one that has integrity, that feels natural? Do the audiences of brand X and artist Y have a synergy between them? Do they want to have similar conversations? So whilst I think there is one arm of the sector that will maybe say, oh, but they've sold out, they've done this partnership with X, Y, and Z. I personally think the trend and the exponential growth, I guess, of these artist and brand partnerships have made them has been so fast in the last few years. People do talk about saturation, but if we take a step back, it actually is now expected of brands to use culture, to champion artists as a voice for their visual communication or their messaging or their storytelling. Yes, that maybe has become mainstream, but again, it's like the 25-year-old today, seeing art, digesting art, whether that's in a very traditional gallery space, in the public realm, or frankly via their phones looking at a collaboration that one of their favorite brands has done, has become much more of a hobby than it was, and a sort of an expected norm than it was when I was 25. I think I was quite unique, but I was in the minority going to galleries when I was 25. And it was probably because I studied art history and I had a genuine interest in it. Most 25-year-olds weren't doing that. The current are, and that really therefore, I guess, puts pressure on, in a positive way, puts pressure on these brands to be using their budgets in a way that champions artists. So we try and guide artists to work with the brands that they feel affiliation for. Every time we onboard an artist, we're like, give us your brand wish list. Some of them don't even have them. But we also say, like, when you're walking around and you see something by a brand that you really like, whether it's to do with a specific artist or just some form of campaign, you like it, take a picture of it, send it to us, just WhatsApp it to us, because then we get a feeling for what you're excited by. You've also got to remember that financially, a lot of artists have dreamt so big for so long, yet financially have not been able to realize those dreams. Brands can help them do that. And that for us is where that real magic happens, when you have a brand who wants to, who has a moment in their calendar or has an objective box that they need to tick. And we know, because 3 weeks ago, we spoke to an artist about this project that just seems like the most, perfect match. That's what gets us really excited. And then we can go to that brand and say, listen, it's really extraordinary timing, but we've just had this conversation about a project that we can really visualize, rolling out under the umbrella of your brand in this space that you've mentioned, et cetera, et cetera. So we do advise some artists against certain projects. Absolutely. There are briefs that come in with certain alarm bells. And we politely, we are also B Corp as well. So we have to be really responsible in a way that revenue is not just the driving force behind our day-to-day business. It has to make sense. It has to retain, allow an artist to retain integrity. And for us as a company too, as well, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much. I know we've gone over time, so appreciate for everyone who's still on the call. I want to answer this one last question from our attendees in regards to how to transition in terms of working from an art gallery to a talent agency like MTArt. And is it possible to evolve as a freelancer? So I'm not quite sure, I guess, saying not attached to a gallery. So if someone's not attached to a gallery, how is it possible to transition?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, this one. I understood it as, I think, well, it's sort of two questions in one, but should I jump in and see if I can?
Yes, see how you
I think it is, we work a lot in unison with galleries. So we don't necessarily ask our artists to all have exclusivity with us. So we very much respect that model. And some artists that come to us really only want to talk to us about, they might be with a gallery for their art sales, but they really, really like what we do because we can help build their reputation within the public art space with Sarah's help. Or actually they find navigating those brand collaboration conversations really difficult. So they want our help with that. that's a very, very sort of short and sweet answer. The second part of the question, is it possible to evolve in this sector as a freelancer, so as a talent representative within the visual sector? I'm definitely not saying no, because obviously Maureen, when she started as a one-man band. But I think what we have seen is and what Sarah rightly touched on at the beginning of the call, is this bandwidth, and there's a lot of work that goes into every single one of these projects. So if you are someone who's lucky to have a pool of expertise and lots of transferable skills, and you've worked, hopefully across a lot of sectors, then I do see the potential. But it's really just about what that offering is. Do you want to represent 3 artists and no more? If so, as a freelancer, if so, I think it seems possible. If you want to try and represent 50, we struggle as a team in London, a full team, to get through our day-to-day, and we feel like we're a big team now. So I think on a very, very practical level, bandwidth would probably be the most obvious answer about whether it's a make or break as a freelancer.
Yeah, I would say the same. It's for a freelancer element, it's all about capacity, how much work you can take on, how much flexibility you have, because and also probably your support structure in terms of the people, the suppliers, the kind of the unofficial agency you have around you, your printers, your lawyers, and all that. If you have that strong support system, if you're coming from a very strong cultural institutional background, yes, that's true. But again, it's all about kind of how big you want to get on your own is the question.
Thank you. I think to wrap up today, and I know we've gone over time, so for anyone who needs to go, this will be on the replay. But let's for all our attendees and anyone watching the replay, to our speakers today, what do you think? Where do you see the future of art partnerships? Megan, do you want to start with that?
Well, we've touched on it throughout the conversation. Technology is going to play a more increasingly role. And I feel that the exciting thing on behalf of artists, the undiscovered artists out there that are highly talented, that have got a strong work ethic, they can be seen and noticed by the likes of MTArt and galleries and museums very quickly, and they don't have to prove themselves anymore, I don't believe. I think the succession of the rise of an artist is not the traditional route, which I'm very excited about. The other thing also is the increasing amount of technology in museum shows, like your Van Gogh. I don't think that they're a trend. I think they will increase and become more integrated. And I'm excited to see traditional museums bringing that into their space. I also see that it's not going to be lost on those beautiful original works by the masterpieces and the arts. In fact, if anything, is going to pique a curiosity with the next generation and have them want to look at that original Van Gogh in those museums, or whoever art that is and artist that is, so that there is that beautiful connection between traditional, original, and technology. I don't feel that technology will leave the traditional original behind. I feel like there's going to be a nice connection between the two. And I see that MTArt and galleries and museums, if they connect this world, then we can move forwards together with the the old and the new in a beautiful, tangible way.
Thank you so much. Blue and Sarah, do you want to comment quickly on that?
I think Megan put it brilliantly. I think technology would have been my first sort of and most obvious answer as well. But I also think, what I'm really welcoming at the moment, and obviously we as a B Corp would say this, but is the sector's dedication to the championing of underrepresented artists as well, and a very welcomed and timely pressure, if you like, for institutions to make sure that they have a very, very diverse offering of the artists that are represented within their spaces. That for me is really exciting and important. I think also the actual physical immersive art, which obviously links to a lot of digital art, and what you were mentioning about the Van Gogh, etc., those sort of main, headlining exhibitions that are taking cities by storm. I think that for me is also very exciting. A lot of the briefs we're getting in at the moment are from brands wanting to create unique experiences that make people think and feel and immerse them. And obviously a lot of our responses are very much linked to artists who are pushing the boundaries with AI, with responsive design, with generative design. And that's really interesting. It's also a real education process for brands. It's not, that techie side of art wasn't something that I was a huge expert in when I joined the agency. So we're, through our artists, we're learning everything every day. They're learning that those learnings are translated down to us. We're then educating our brand partners, on all of those advancements and innovations. So that for me is really, again, really, really exciting, and that it's almost sort of a never-ending upward curve and what is possible, and ultimately it comes down, it all links back to this desire to use art as a tool to surprise and delight and tell stories, I think.
I will add one thing. I agree both Blue and Megan on the technology element, but I think on the public art element mainly, we will probably see a bit of degrowth as well. I think we will see with sustainability concerns in mind and more increasing conversations around inclusivity, we're going to see less and less temporary public art, more and more permanent pieces that are meaningful, sustainable, with a longevity. So I think that's where the public art is evolving to. I would call it a degrowth, not in a negative way. It's a big subject, also in architecture. But that would be something that we're going to experience in the next 10 years.
I think it's also that feeling of, when we talk about it here a bit, is, it's not really enough now just to talk about art within the art sector. We talk a lot about the visual sector. And that for me feels more applicable when we're talking about the work that we do, and the work that our artists do in this day and age, how brands connect with those artists, what visual communication looks like, what's the future of that communication, and what role does art play in that. So yeah, I'm very conscious of time, sorry.
No, I know. So just to wrap up, I mean, I'm very excited to see what this industry has in store for us, from developers looking to spend big budgets on new hospitality developments, and really thinking bigger than just the architect and the interiors, and taking a step forward to make a statement, to bring in local artists, or artists that reflect their own values, and really bringing some that quality of cohesiveness between artist and architect into their designs, now that things have opened up and people do have the budgets again. I think it's going to be a very exciting next couple of years. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining and staying, and we appreciate, and we did go over, but thanks to our guests. And we will have a replay of this that will, if you've registered, you will get that automatically. You'll be hearing from me on that. And we'll also have a link up on YouTube shortly. So thank you everyone again for joining. And this topic's been incredible. Thanks for your time.
Lovely. Thank you.